Hello, everyone. Dick Lucas here. Let's get right into it. We have some big issues we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about George Floyd. We're going to be talking about the protests that are ensuing. We're going to talk about the Hong Kong protests as well that are going on right now. We're going to talk about Twitter and Trump. We're going to talk about more specifically China and Hong Kong. Why are there protests in Hong Kong? We're going to talk about China and India. We're going to talk about NASA and SpaceX. Now, we're going to shoot for under 59 minutes or under 60 minutes here, and we might not get to all of it, but we're going to cover those topics in this order. And I want to start by saying that I'm not here to get people riled up. We're going to be talking about some seriously big societal fundamental issues, and I want you to know up front that I'm here to have a good faith discussion on these issues. I'm not here to rile anyone up. I don't have a specific agenda. My only agenda is the truth, and I'm going to be there's certain issues where it's like walking through a laser grid, right? You're trying to go through and make sure that you don't say anything that is a little, that can be construed in a certain way, especially when you're talking about issues of race, especially when you're talking about what's going on with George Floyd. People are naturally very sensitive to these things, and I, quite frankly, I'm nervous discussing. For those reasons, I'm nervous discussing some of these issues, and I haven't really so far on the show. But I can't have a show here that claims to think in decades and talk about things that are going to matter in decades and not cover these types of issues. So I'm going to cover these types of issues. I'm going to cover this stuff with, take a chance here. I don't think I'm saying anything here that's going to be wildly controversial, but I will be navigating this laser grid a little bit because I think threading the needle on a lot of these issues that are complicated, it's a difficult thing to do, and people will simply just chalk it up and won't even attempt to do that, or they'll simply take one side or the other and make it very, very simple. Make it very simple for themselves and then for people listening to them. I'm not trying to make things simple. That's not my goal here. My goal here is to talk about the issues, give you a good faith discussion about the issues, and give you what is my opinion. I do this with the assumption that if anything ever becomes of this show, or if I ever become notable in some way, publicly notable in some way, I'm almost damn sure that something I've said on this show will absolutely be come back to bite me. I struggled that early on with this podcast. I've been doing that for 3 years. At first, I started with having people on. Having guests, and I still have guests, but now I do a lot of these riff sessions on my own. And I remember I said, I cursed in the first episode, with Chris Durr. God bless that man. I said, "Oh my God, can I do that? Can I curse? Is that?" And I'm putting this out there, and I quickly, kind of strengthen that muscle. And the thing I've settled on is, listen, there's gonna be things I'm that are probably going to come back to bite me in the ass with some of this stuff. But the reality is, I want to do this. I want to talk about these issues. It's important to me. It's fun, and I think a lot of the stuff is missing in the mainstream. And I do think I'm providing, I'm adding to the conversation here. So I don't talk about things where I don't think I'm adding to the conversation. I don't want to just repeat what you probably already know. So let's get right into it here. It's funny because talking to one of my homies, Dave. He's gonna be in a PhD program in philosophy, and we often riff on this stuff. And it's funny because he's reading a lot of Aristotle, Plato. He's read a lot of these early philosophers, these classics, if you will. And he said a lot of the things they're talking about are the same things we're talking about today. There's fundamental things about humanity that simply do not change, about the things that make us happy, about the things we want to do, about the things we want to discuss, about the freedoms we want. These things are fundamental and they do not change. And it's insane to think that we could have anything in common with someone from 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. But the reality is we can draw a direct line from our ancestors to where we are now. That's how it works. That's how society works. That's how humanity works. That's how we're doing this whole thing we like to call civilization. So let's fucking get right into it here. And I want to start with what I think is the top of mind right now. It's the George Floyd situation and the protests that are ensuing. And we're going to talk about, get into little specifics about what happened with George Floyd specifically. But I want to take a step back for a second, and I want to talk about protesting in general. And I'm going to open up with this, which is the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That is this. I'm going to read it verbatim. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. As I read this, I get shivers. That is a very beautiful, 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 well-written statement on a fundamental American value. And I think a fundamental value that it's not even just an American thing. I think humans yearn for protection from not even necessarily government, but some arbiter of power preventing what they can talk about, or who they can meet up with. And, we talk about, as I started the show, we're talking about, having the same discussions we were having 2,000 years ago. Look at the framers of the Constitution. Look at this First Amendment a few hundred years ago, right? This is still so amazingly prescient today. It on some level makes my fucking head spin. But let's start with and the First Amendment. I absolutely love. I love protesting in general. Peaceful protest, of course. I've done it. I've done it several times. I love the way it makes me feel. I love when I see a police officer that is on the sideline watching these protests, trying to keep people safe. I love that I can be in a country where I'm even allowed to protest in a peaceful manner. It's a beautiful, beautiful right. Every time I do it, it's unbelievable because it gives you. I encourage people to protest. If you feel strongly about something, go get a sign, or even just hold space. Stand with people, even if you don't have something personally, you don't really feel like you have a dog in the fight, but you feel that the people that are protesting do, and they feel strongly. You want to hold space for them. Go stand. Even just standing there. You don't have to scream. You don't have to shout. Which that's always fun. That's again a fundamental right to be able to say, assemble with people and say what you want. I encourage you to do that. But what happened with the lockdowns early on is you had protesters. Now I'm not going to defend protesters who are protesting hospitals and preventing them from being able to do conduct themselves and do what they have to do to save lives and give health care to people. I'm not going to talk about specific protesters, whether I even support the protest in general or whether I think they can go about it the wrong way. Here's what I will say fundamentally, and I wish I was more outspoken about this, but I've had this belief, and I've riffed on it on Twitter a bit, I believe, or at least I've liked things. I don't exactly know, but I'll say this: when the protests broke out, when people were protesting the lockdown, there were protests. I'm in Durham, North Carolina now. There were protests locally here. I did not partake in them, but there were protests all over the country. Most notable, the ones I believe in Michigan, where armed men were in the Capitol building. Now let me say this. Protesting in general, I do not believe that the government should ever under any circumstance, I don't care if we're talking about a pandemic, I don't care if we're talking about being able to spread COVID-19, whatever it is, it's just too sacred to not allow people to protest. Now, if I was out here protesting the lockdowns, I personally do not feel they are worth protesting. I think we have a pandemic on our hands, especially early on. We didn't know what the hell was going on. We had to err on the side of caution. So I would not personally feel strongly, but I felt very strongly about allowing people to peaceably assemble if they truly believed that the government was infringing on their rights. I feel very, very strongly that they have a right to peaceably assemble. And yes, do I think they should be standing 6 feet apart and helping not spread the virus? Absolutely. But when we're talking about the First Amendment and allowing people to peaceably assemble and not be shot down by their government, and not be that is fundamental. I am always in support of that. So it's interesting now that we have a situation which I personally believe is more worth protesting, assembling around, which is George Floyd, the protests that are currently going on around the country. And it just really puts it in perspective, because yes, you might not have agreed. There are many people, and there are many people, and I saw on some of cable news, people were saying, "Look at these people protesting the lockdown; they're idiots." Now, whether you think they're idiots or not, that's not the point. The point is they're allowed; they should be allowed to protest, and I will always support that. But then you have a situation. This is why it matters to have values. This is why it matters to have principles. This is why it matters to not get caught up in the specifics all the time and look at just a fundamental right to peaceably assemble. You have a situation where, and we're going to talk more about the details, but George Floyd, I believe he was 46, a black man, was killed by a police officer. The police that George Floyd supposedly used, and that's how this whole situation started. You have a situation like that, where now imagine if, and I commend the people that are protesting, that are peacefully protesting. I commend them, and I think they should continue to do so. And we're going to talk more about the violent protests a little bit. Right before we went on, and I was actually a couple minutes late because I was finishing watching this. Killer Mike gave an amazing, and I encourage you to Google it. I will link to it in the show notes. He gave an amazing rundown of a message to his to his people. I believe it was in Atlanta. Yeah, to the people of Atlanta, to the people, he was urging them not to, as he said, burn your house to the ground. So we'll talk more about that. But I just want you to realize the point that as soon as the government, if the government made the point, you cannot peaceably assemble because you are protesting a lockdown order, and if you're close to each other, you're going to spread the virus. Boom. What if they then use that, and they haven't, but what if they did then use that as an excuse on why people could not protest George Floyd? What if they tear gas thousands of peaceful protests, and they are using tear gas, and there's different protests all over the country, but what if they then use that as a means to say, no, you cannot peacefully protest because you're going to spread the virus? No, that is why it is such a sacred thing. You cannot give it up. You cannot give it up for a fucking inch. And I'm glad. Generally, people were allowed to protest the lockdowns, and I think they absolutely should be able to. Just like I think people absolutely, and I personally feel more strongly the George Floyd protests are more valid. But again, I want to really urge you to think about this. Isn't about what I think or what you think is valid and what should be allowed, what protests should be allowed to happen, what protests should not be allowed to happen. The whole point of the First Amendment, the whole point of people being able to assemble is that it doesn't matter what you think of them. It doesn't matter what they're saying. What matters is that people can collectively come together and hold up a sign and give an opinion about something that they think is wrong. It doesn't matter what it is. It does not matter what it is. So I want to shift your thinking from that and just be a proponent of the First Amendment, how beautifully sacred it is, and honor it that way by honoring protest in general. That is where I stand on the matter. I feel exceptionally strongly about that. Protest is it's a very American thing. It's a fundamental way on how progress happens. If we do not allow protest to happen, or if we get in a situation where we allow some protest to happen and don't allow others, that is limiting speech. That is limiting what progress can and cannot happen. And absolutely, people are going to protest stupid shit. Absolutely. I mean, the ACLU, which I'm a fucking proud card-carrying member of, defended and helped, I forget exactly, but basically white supremacists to allow them to protest in certain areas. It was I forget exactly the case, but it was in a city, and they were able to get permits because the ACLU helped them. And many people, the American Civil Liberties Union, many people came criticized the ACLU for that. And my point is, the whole point of the First Amendment is that it's not about whether you agree with them or not. It's about that anyone, no matter what, should be allowed to peaceably assemble. Full stop. Okay, so let's get into some of the images. Let's talk a little bit about this. So let's talk about the violence that's ensuing from the protest. So, and I encourage you to look at what Killer Mike said. What I'm about to say, he said it 1,000 times better than I can possibly say. He did an excellent job. And I encourage you to read what he did, or watch his video. It's about an 8-minute video. It's super powerful. It's unbelievable. But one thing I will say is, I follow people on Twitter. I follow people on the left. I follow people on the right. I follow people I disagree with. I follow them because it's helpful to know what they are saying. And even if I don't agree with them on everything, there are certain things that I will agree with some people on, and that's the way it is. If you only follow people that you think you agree with, that's not how you learn anything. That's not how you change. That's not how you gain new perspective. Even if you don't agree with the person that you're following, even if every single thing they say is wrong, it is helpful, assuming they're having good faith discussions about something. You got to be careful with people that don't have good faith discussions. You have to be careful with engaging with people that they're not concerned with the truth. They're not concerned with right or wrong. They're just concerned with sticking by their point, and that's it. And maybe they don't even believe it. Maybe they're just trying to rile you up. You got to be careful with that. But even for people you don't agree with, follow them, see what they say. Because that, even if you don't agree with anything they say, it's going to help you understand their position better. It's going to help you argue against it better. It's going to give you more ammo. It's going to give you a better, well-rounded view of the other side. You know, you hear about making straw man arguments. Well, make an Iron Man argument, right? When you're arguing against someone or you're giving someone else's point, don't just say, oh, well, they think this, and then give a poor representation of their point. Give the correct representation of their point, and then dismantle it. That makes you a good truth seeker. That makes you a good arguer. That makes you a good learner. So I will say I follow people on the right, and a lot of the images I'm seeing, about the protest. If all I did was look at these people on the right, if all I did, and I don't, but if all I did, I would think that the only thing happening right now is looting, violence, fires, and destruction, which is not the case. Which of course is not the case. Most people are not looting. Most people are not burning things to the ground. Most people are peaceably assembling because they feel an injustice has been done. So here's what I'll say. And again, Killer Mike said it better. And I'm going to quote him. He said, "If you sit in your homes tonight," he's talking to the people of Atlanta, "if you sit in your homes tonight, instead of burning your homes to the ground, you will have time to properly plot, plan, strategize, mobilize, organize in an effective way." He's speaking out specifically against the violent protests, because again, whether you think if the goal of the protest, and let me be clear, a lot of these people, these people that are looting, these people that are causing destruction, you can see videos of it. They don't care about George Floyd. They don't care about the movement. These people do not represent the movement. So what I will here's my point. Here's my plea to people that feel that violence is the answer, or that it moves the needle for the movement. You look at what these people on the right are saying. And not all these people on the right. Just some. I don't want to generalize here, but they use these images of the violence and destruction to further their point. They use these images of you walking out with a fucking TV or whatever you just stole from Target or whatever it may be. They use these images as ammunition, and they use them as ammunition against the movement, against the people that are peaceably protesting, against people that actually want structural change, that actually want to want to go to the voting booth. And that's another thing Killer Mike said. He said, go to the voting booth and beat up the politicians that way. And he talks about reinstating a review board, and I believe this was in Atlanta. He talks about what are not all of them. He talks about some of the fundamental structural things that can be changed that will prevent this from happening again. Yes, he says we can get angry about this one instance, and we absolutely should, but it will be for naught if we don't use it as energy to make actual structural change. And again, the violence gives people ammunition. It gives people a reason not to believe that something needs to be done. So I urge people to not violently protest. I urge people to peaceably assemble. Get mad, scream. That's your right. That's your American right. That's your human right to be able to scream and say what you want. Please do that. But do not avoid violence as much as avoid violence. Simple as that. Avoid destruction. As Killer Mike said, don't burn your house to the ground. Now I'm gonna leave a link to that in the description. But if you just Google Killer Mike statements, he made it in the Atlanta police chief was behind him. It's an amazing, very moving speech he gives, and I'm glad I watched it right before going on here. And another thing, just to put this in a little bit of, put this in perspective. The MLK Juniors of the world, the Gandhis of the world, the people that are most associated with protest movements that did cause real change, they were all about peaceably assembling. Now, I forgot where I saw this. I think I was watching a documentary or something where there was a pivotal movement in the civil rights movement. There was a pivotal time when the images of black men and women of getting fire hose and other and dogs being sent on them, all these images that were broadcasted to all of America was a peaceably assembling, and then the police officers using violence against these people who are peaceably assembling to protest what they saw was absolutely an injustice, and it was an injustice, and they absolutely should have been able to protest. And those images were, guess what? They were used to help the civil rights movement. Those images of violence against the protesters were used as ammunition. So in the same way that the ammunition is used against the movement when they focus on looting, and in fact, I do think Killer Mike calls out CNN for this. He says you're spreading fear. You're if you look at the cable news, they're focused on the looting. Even news agencies that pride themselves in being for the Black Lives Matter movement, being for justice being done. Why are you focused on only the violence? Why are you focused on the destruction? Show me a group of people. If you go to a protest, a lot of the times what happens is there'll be people congregating. Like you'll be walking around, and then there'll usually be congregation points, and there will be a group of speakers in the middle, and they'll have a megaphone, or they'll have a speaker system, and then different people will speak and share their opinions on things. In many protests I've been a part of, this is what happened. And people that personally feel strongly, or people that have personally been affected, will get on the mic and they will speak. Why are we not showing these images, which are the vast majority of people? You need to be showing. Listen, they're not as new, clickbaity. They're not as interesting to watch. It's more interesting when someone goes with a sledgehammer and knocks out a window. But you do a disservice when that's all you show, because that does not define the movement. It is very easy, people. I implore you, it is very easy to make 2% of people look like 40%. I saw a tweet that said that recently. It's very easy to make 100 people look like 10,000 and make it look like, oh, this group of people is indicative of this entire movement. That's why anytime you see a video of something, it's basically a plea to your emotion, and it's not the best way to, often the best way to show what is actually happening. Let's one instance of one person doing something, or one group, or one part of the city where violence is happening is not indicative of the entire situation. So I encourage you, anytime you see videos like that, think about that. because it's honestly, it's a disservice to think of to only show very specific parts about in this movement. There are dozens of protests happening all over the country. Most people are not breaking windows, and the people that are, they should not be. They're doing a disservice, and I implore them not to, because they are hurting the movement, if they even care, which most of them do not. Yes, some of them are doing it out of rage, and Killer Mike said this. He says, I know these young people, they're doing it out of rage. They're doing it because they don't know what else to do. And that anger that they have is valid. But Killer Mike says they need to channel that. They need to beat up these politicians in the voting booth. That's what they need to do. They need to talk about things like review boards. That's the lever we need to pull here. So this, again, that pretty much covers the laser grid of issues that I was kind of walking through today. I think I hope I did that. Hope I did that justice. I think it's a very difficult thing to discuss, and I think it's very easy to say. It's very easy to say, oh, all the protesters are doing, a great job. Boom, burn it to the ground. Like, yes, I commend them. And it's also very easy on the other side. There's no gradient in this world, right? It's very easy on the other side to say, look at what they're doing. They're destroying their own city. Do they really care about the city? Do they care about George Floyd? And I would actually agree. A lot of them that are doing that probably don't. They're probably just trying to steal something. Or they're probably just trying to destroy things because it makes them feel powerful or something like that. And some of them absolutely care about George Floyd, and they are angry. But it's careful. These issues are difficult. These issues are, it's not black and white here, okay? These issues are very, very, it's not binary, it's not 0-1. They are very difficult. They're difficult to parse through because they're so emotional, not because they're too complex, right? It's not a complex statement to understand that not every protester is destroying things. That's not a complex thing to understand. We can all understand that. What is very difficult is because people's emotions get involved, and it's difficult to talk about these things because they're so emotionally charged, as it makes sense, as they should be. Okay, let's talk a little bit more. Now let's talk a little bit more about the actual facts. I can already tell you we're 30 minutes in, and I appreciate you. We're 30 minutes in, and we are fucking. There's no way I'm going to get to all this stuff. Okay, but we're going to talk a little bit more about The Economist had a great article, and I especially love, again, I'm a big fan of The Economist. I think it's the single best publication you can read. If you only read one thing, read The Economist. It's based in the UK, and I especially like reading what other people are saying outside of country. What are they saying about America? What are they saying about what we're doing here? It's often an unemotional, detached third-party view, which I love it for that. Okay, here we go. So we already talked about, Derek Chauvin was charged with third-degree murder. This is the police officer that was on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, had his knee on his neck for 9 minutes, and may face further charges of what certainly looks like excessive and unjustified force. Okay, so I should say this article that I'm going to be kind of reading from is Why the Prosecution of Minneapolis Police Officers is Such a Rarity. Okay, that makes him an outlier. Police rarely face criminal charges for actions that might land an ordinary person in the dock. The protesters and rioters on the streets of Minneapolis see this as part of a pattern of institutional racism in which black victims of police malpractice rarely achieve justice, but the police, in fact, enjoy a degree of legal protection from a doctrine known as qualified immunity. Now, I never heard of this, and it's frankly, it blows my mind reading about it. This qualified immunity is what prevents police officers from being charged, from being prosecuted. Let's keep talking about it. Federal law gives Americans the right to sue government officials who violate their constitutional rights. But in Pearson v. Ray, decided in 1967, the Supreme Court held that public officials who commit good faith rights violations are entitled to qualified immunity intended to shield them against frivolous lawsuits. As the Supreme Court explained in 2015, that means that government employees cannot be sued for actions undertaken in the course of their duties, so long as their conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. That sounds sensible enough. But over time, the clearly established part of the doctrine has almost completely subsumed the reasonable part. For instance, on September 10th, 2013, police officers in Fresno, California searched the homes and businesses of two men suspected of running an illegal gambling operation. The men alleged that the police seized $150K worth of cash and another $125K worth of coins. But the cops reported they only took $50K worth. The men sued in the Ninth Circuit Court, but the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, but the case was dismissed. The court held that it need not determine whether the men's constitutional rights had been violated, which that's a mind-blowing statement. The court held that it need not determine whether the men's constitutional rights have been violated, i.e., in this case, whether the officers actually had stolen the property in question, which would have breached the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizure. This is a fundamental right, which promises prosecution against unreasonable searches and seizures, because there was no clearly established law holding that officers violate the Fourth Amendment when they steal property that is seized pursuant to a warrant. The two men were not entitled to relief, though the court noted near the end of its briefing, we sympathize with the appellants. Or consider the Malika Brooks, who was 7 months pregnant and whom police dragged from her car in front of her 11-year-old son and tasered her 3 times in less than a minute because she declined to sign a traffic ticket. A panel of federal judges ruled that even though Miss Brooks' violation, driving 12 miles over the speed limit, was not serious, and she did not pose even a potential threat to anyone's safety, the officer's actions did not violate clearly established law. Small wonder that Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court's most ardent Fourth Amendment champion, called qualified immunity, as most courts have come to interpret it, an absolute shield for law enforcement officers, gutting the deterrent effect of the Fourth Amendment. Clear. Even a potential threat to anyone's safety. Qualified immunity. That's what you need to remember about this. Qualified immunity. That's the statement. And also, so that is one of the things. So when we talk about these issues, what is one of the reasons this happens? Qualified immunity. I did not know this existed until this week. I did not know about this. I did not know that there were carve-outs in the Fourth Amendment, that if they're just trying to do their job, then your Fourth Amendment doesn't matter. You're telling me a person that didn't sign a piece of paper, who was not violent at all, who was pregnant, taken out, tased, and they did not prosecute these police officers? That's absurd. Qualified immunity is hardly the only reason why police officers rarely face criminal penalties for actions such as stealing cash and coins or repeatedly tasering a pregnant woman. Actions that an ordinary citizen would almost certainly have to answer for in court. Criminal cases have to be prosecuted. Prosecutors who closely work with police. Police tend to close ranks around their own, and a prosecutor who made enemies of his city or county's police force would find it hard to do his job. And this is what Killer Mike was saying. He was saying, he was talking about review boards. There needs to be a way to hold these cops accountable. Now, not people that they work with on a daily basis. You can't expect these people that they go to each other's kids' soccer games to be able to hold each other accountable. That's not how this works. Now, there needs to be reform here. These are the conversations we need to be having right now. We don't need CNN to be constantly showing the violence that's ensuing. Yes, it's important to cover it. Absolutely. We need to know what is going on. We need to know areas of the city that are unsafe. People need to know that. But when that's all you talk about, we have a problem. We need to talk more. We need to focus more about, okay, what are some of these things we can change? What are these inherent biases? For example, this qualified immunity, or the fact that these prosecutors are expected to prosecute their own friends. We need to figure that out. Let's focus on that. But there's hope. So the Supreme Court is currently considering whether to hear several cases concerning qualified immunity and its excesses. A diverse range of supporters, not just the usual suspects, such as the American Civil Liberties Union and the Libertarian Cato Institute, but also conservative Christian groups, such as the Alliance Defending Freedom, is urging the justices to take another look at the doctrine. Effective policing requires community support, and police officers who place themselves above the law will never get it. Okay, so I will link to that piece as well. I think it's super interesting, and I think these are the conversations. These are the productive conversations. This angst we feel. We need to channel it into these things. We need to channel it in. Okay, how do we let's not just get angry at this one. How do we prevent the next one? Because this will happen again. This will 100% happen again. It will. So we need to figure out how to not just get mad at this. How do we change the system? That's where our energy needs to be. Okay, I appreciate you all. Appreciate all us having that discussion here. I think it's absolutely important, and I think it's a difficult discussion to have. A lot of times, it's people are afraid to have it, and right on. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about Twitter and Trump. Now, this is more. This is again related to the First Amendment here. So let's just have a little bit of a timeline here. So earlier this week, Twitter put a warning, and this is the first time they've done it, but they put a little warning label on one of Trump's tweets that talked about mail-in ballot was wrong. It just said, get the facts. And actually, if you look at it, and Ben Thompson made this point in Stratechery, if you actually look at it, it almost looks like it's supporting him. Say, get the facts. Look at this, exclamation point. Get the facts. This guy's right. Like, let's link to it. But that's not the case. They were actually trying to, that's not what they were doing. But here's what else. And then later, so that happened. Then later, they made Trump made a tweet, and I'm going to read that tweet right here. He made two tweets, and Killer Mike actually referenced it. He referenced the second part of this tweet. So here's what it says. Look, okay, I can't stand back and watch this happen to a great American city. This is Donald Trump tweeting this. To a great American city, Minneapolis. A total lack of leadership. Either the very weak radical left mayor, Jacob Frey, get his act together and bring the city under control, or I will send the National Guard and get the job done right. Okay, then the second tweet, which was a reply to the tweet. If you're not familiar with Twitter, if you reply to your own tweet, it connects them. It makes a thread. So here's the second tweet, and this is the one that Twitter said. Basically, you had to click a button that said, this is against our policy, this is inciting violence, whatever the exact wording was. I don't have it in front of me, but you had to click view to be able to view it. You could not retweet it, you could not like it, you could not reply to it. And it wasn't, and they gave a statement saying that they were going to prevent it from spreading further. It's a strong word to say censor, but they were certainly limiting the ability for Trump to get his statements out there. So here's the second part. This is the second part, and this is the one that was that Twitter had not the warning on, but you had to specifically click view to be able to view it. These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you, exclamation point. Okay, it's that last point. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. That is what Twitter took issue with, and that is what Trump is quoting someone, I believe it, and Killer Mike said this in his piece, in his speech. He was talking about, he was referencing someone else. I forget who, but someone else has made that statement. I think it was someone who was racist. I think it was from the 60s or something. Now, don't quote me on that. But it was basically an ode to that. And when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So Twitter argued that he was promoting violence, and that's against their terms of use, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. I want to start by saying this. For people that think either Donald Trump's Twitter account should be deleted, or they think some of his tweets that you deem wrong should be deleted, again, this is one of those laser grid issues that we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about this. I would say this. Do you want a private company determining and adding editorial content around the statements, or limiting the statements, limiting the spread of the statements of a democratically elected president? I say no. I don't think a private company should be that should not be their responsibility. Now, Twitter's totally allowed to do this. There's nothing that says they can't. There's section which from the Communications Decency Act in 1996, Section 230, which basically says that these platforms like Twitter, Facebook, I mean, Twitter wasn't around at this point, but they are, let's see, you can't sue Twitter for banning or not banning an account. You can't, so you can't determine how it is that Twitter should police its network. You can't, if someone says something on Twitter's platform, and this is the main part of the Section 230, if someone says something on Twitter's platform that is false or wrong, it's not Twitter's responsibility. Twitter cannot be held liable. Okay. Besides the fact that I don't think it should be a private company's job to censor, not to censor, but, well, in fact, actually, that second tweet it says it's unavailable. So I don't know if it was ultimately deleted before we went on air. That tweet is no longer up. So I don't know if Trump deleted it or what happened there. But I don't think Twitter should be in the business of messing with government officials' statements or doing anything like that. A democratically elected president, I don't think they should be in the business of that. I don't think it's a good road to go down. And this has been Jack Dorsey, the CEO. This has been his position this entire time. He said it's better that we know. And when he went on that podcast spree in like 2019, I think, when he was talking to a lot of people, or was it 2018? I don't think Twitter, he said, listen, it's better that we know what these politicians are thinking. It is newsworthy. We should know what they are thinking. It's only going to further the conversation and benefit the conversation. It doesn't help if we nuke these people from the platform. So 2 things I want to say. One, even if Donald Trump's Twitter account was deleted, he would still be able to get his statements out. Full stop. You think, oh, he's off Twitter now, boom, oh, his base or the people that want to hear him speak aren't be able to, that's not an issue at all. He'll absolutely get the statements out. And number 2, if you are against Donald Trump and you want to limit his momentum as much as possible, you would not want Twitter to pick this fight. You would not want his account to get deleted. You don't think this would absolutely just fuel his base? You don't think the many Republicans and Trump would point to this and show that the world, that private companies are conspiring against Republicans? You don't think this would fuel that fire? Even if you think Twitter should nuke his account, fine. If you think that, I urge you, do you think it's going to help anything? I would contend it's going to make it work. Look at when Hillary Clinton called his supporters a basket of deplorables. It fueled them. They rallied around that. That is something that encouraged them. Now, I'm not a Trump supporter at all. I'm going to be voting for Joe Biden, and No Gradient released a statement supporting Joe Biden early on in the Democratic this whole process. This is someone that has severe cognitive issues going. Trump does too, but so does Biden, and Biden oftentimes stumbles over his own words. I have concerns about that, but I am willing to vote for him over Donald Trump. Full stop. I think Donald Trump spits on American values. I think he's super dangerous to what we've built here in this country. I think his attacks on the media are disgusting. That's some third world country shit. That's not what we do in the United States. We don't not hold press briefings for over a year now. And we talked about, I think March 9th was a year anniversary of they stopped holding the White House press briefings. They still do something. But the official ones, and they might have restarted those, but for a year they didn't do those press briefings. That's not what we do. We don't. That's not pursuant to our values. So I urge you to think through a little bit. Think through these issues a little bit. Another thing to think about is when Donald Trump. It's someone you don't like whose Twitter's messing with, who delete his account, who can put fact checking all around it. What if it's someone you do like? What if, always think about these issues if someone else, if it was your person if it was someone you supported, a lot of times this has to do with presidents. So let's just say it was Obama. Would you want Twitter doing anything around the things he is tweeting? And you would say, okay, well, Obama doesn't tweet anything or never did tweet anything comparable to what Donald Trump does. And I would say, yes, that's true. But then I would say, as soon as you open up that Pandora's box of messing with a democratically elected president, of messing with their putting fact checks around their tweets, or straight up preventing those tweets from getting out there, you've now opened up the Pandora's box, and now it's an established thing. And now, what's to stop Twitter from doing it to someone that you like? Now, it's within their power to do so. They can police their content how they want. They're a private company. Again, the First Amendment protects people from the government. It doesn't protect people from Twitter. Twitter, if you tweet something, Twitter can nuke your account. There's no First Amendment. No. That's to protect us from the government. It's not to protect us from fucking Twitter, Facebook, MySpace. No, you can't even post on MySpace anymore. The First Amendment applies to protecting us from the government, not that the government cannot interfere in your free speech. So that's something to think about with this. Okay. So I urge you, again, think about these issues holistically. I mean, think about all the executive orders that Obama was doing. A lot of people cheered them. And if you look at the increased, and we've talked about this on the show, if you look at the increased power of the executive branch over the last few decades, this is well documented. This isn't something that's controversial. The executive branch is doing more and more than it ever has. And I don't care if it's Obama in the White House. I don't care if it's Trump. Ask yourself not, why is Trump doing these things? Ask yourself, why is he allowed to do some of these things? Why are these executive orders even allowed to happen? Why is he allowed to intervene in investigations? Why? Well, there's a lot of the times he's not even breaking the law. A lot of the times he's using the executive authority. Why are we not having conversations about limiting this executive branch? These are the ways we need it. Giving more. Congress has been asleep at a wheel with a lot of things. Asleep at the wheel with foreign relations, with war, with the war on terror. The president can essentially now go to war without Congress's approval. That is a lot of power in the executive branch. So these are the conversations I want you to think about. Always think about if it was reversed. What if it's someone that when Obama was there, we were cheering it. I always think, well, let's ask ourselves, would we be happy if someone had the keys to the kingdom that we did not like? I mean, this is what the founding fathers, the whole point of the system that was created, it's supposed to be slow. It's supposed to be inefficient. That's what they had in mind. An efficient, super fast moving government that can do things unilaterally is one that takes your rights and does things without the consensus of the people. This is why the whole system worked. This is part of the reason why our response to COVID-19 could have been much improved, could have been a hell of a lot better. The amount of autonomy that states have is a lot more than in other countries. We don't have a super strong federal national government. The states have a lot of rights in this country. I think it's the 10th Amendment or the 11th Amendment, states' rights. That anything that the federal government doesn't have, those rights go to the state. So just let's think about these issues that way. Okay, so it's 9 minutes. I don't have much time. First, I want to say this though. Actually, I'll actually end on a good note. We have about 9 minutes. So I'll end with that. There. And we'll talk more about this. But okay, let's go quickly through this stuff. China and Hong Kong. I talk a lot about China on here, and again, my whole thing with a lot of these, a fundamental way I view the world is this: it's that I want the most amount of people to have the most amount of freedom as possible to pursue the things that they want to do individually to make them happy. That is where I fall. So when I see a dictatorship of over 1 billion people, I think what does China have 1-point-something billion people? It's a dictatorship. Xi Jinping, their leader, he's a few years ago, he's in for life. There's no sense of democracy there. So when I look at something like that, and I look at what China does, I look at what they do with the way they spy and censor their people. I look at what they do in the business world. I look at how they I look at how they steal intellectual property. I look at how they prop up their own businesses and don't allow foreign competitors into their markets. I look at how they deflate the value of their currency. They do all these things that are not good, that are bad. And it's a huge country, an economic powerhouse. I think people give it a little too much. They're a little, and frankly, The Economist, which great publication, but they give China a little too much credit and how much power they have. One of the things with it takes they talk about, is China the new hegemon? It's taken a century. A hegemon requires allies, and it's taken a century for the United States to build up our alliance system. You don't become China doesn't have any allies. Everyone they border is at odds with them, except for maybe fucking North Korea. Okay, but they don't have any strong allies. Okay, so you can't become a hegemon without allies. It takes trust. It takes decades and decades of trust. It takes decades and decades of working these alliances out. So I'm not worried that they're going to become a hegemon. What I am worried about is some of the things they're doing. Absolutely. So you look at Hong Kong. So Hong Kong was handed over to China and it was supposed to have a high degree of autonomy. So I'm going to go through this stuff because we only have a couple minutes. They were given a high degree of autonomy. They were handed over to China. Hong Kong was from because the UK had control over Hong Kong. They handed it over to China and said for 50 years they get to govern themselves. And basically what China has done, and I'm not going to get into too much of the details here. I will link to the article talking about this. But they've inserted. The committee said it had reached a decision that China would impose a national security law on Hong Kong. The territory's own legislature would have no role in drafting it. The bill would prevent and punish any conduct that seriously endangers national security, including separatism, subversion of state power, terrorism, and activities by foreign and overseas forces that interfere in Hong Kong affairs. Okay, so when they made this deal where Hong Kong could be independent, it said, okay, China was allowed to handle the foreign policy stuff, but anything the Hong Kong people were allowed to govern themselves. That was the deal. And China has gone back on that, and the Hong Kong people are fighting for freedom. Now, they're fighting for freedom. Now, I don't care that even if there wasn't some fucking stipulation that said, okay, they get to govern themselves for 50 years. I don't care if it lasted 5 years and now China gets to govern them. Anywhere in the world where people are fighting for freedom and autonomy in order to govern themselves, and when I see a regime that is acting maliciously, I will always support people fighting to govern themselves. I will fundamentally always support that. And now I don't mean to. I talk about people call me a China hawk, right? I don't have an allegiance against China one way or the other. I have an allegiance to humanity. I have an allegiance to individuals. I have an allegiance to people being able to govern themselves. Look, the United States. I constantly talk about the United States, the fact that the NSA lied to the American people about the spying regime that we cooked up here. That I think unfortunately regulation is not going to fix. We created a monster. It's only end-to-end encryption that's going to fix that. It's only private messages that are going to fix that, and other technologies that are on the horizon that are going to give us freedom to not have the government listen in. I am a hawk of anywhere where I see power is being used unjustly, and anything that's going to take the rights away from individuals. That's where I draw the line. So I'm not. I don't mean to pick on China. Well, I do mean to pick on China, but it's not because it's anything about China. I don't have no beef with China. I have beef with the fact that what they're doing, what the actions they're taking. Okay, what the CCP is doing. And in fact, oftentimes I say China. Well, this isn't. There's a distinction. There's the Chinese Communist Party that rules the country. Then there's China. So I should really be saying the CCP, right? It's the ruling party that are doing these things. So I support the Hong Kong protesters 110%. Keep doing what you're doing. They're out there. Google it. And the media is not covering this as much as they should. Now, this has been going on. It flared up a few months ago, right? But then people kind of went back to work. But then it's flared up again because China just basically said that we can govern you and we can arrest anyone we want, which is a hell of a change. Imagine another country come and say, okay, we can arrest anyone we want in your country. No, we wouldn't be down for it. We would protest. Absolutely. So Hong Kong people, keep doing your thing. It gives me shivers watching you guys. It gets me fired up. Keep doing your thing. Keep fighting for freedom. That's what this is about, baby. Okay. Well, we only got 2 minutes. I was going to talk about China and India a little bit. There's a little bit of a border dispute. China's getting a little frisky there. But I've got 2 minutes. I'm just going to say there's a SpaceX launch today. We're going to talk more about this on the next show because we only got like 60 seconds. There's a SpaceX launch today at 3:22 p.m. Eastern time. That's Saturday. It might be postponed due to weather, but let's. This is a big deal because it's the first manned mission launching from American soil in 9 years. Since we retired the program, since NASA retired the program. NASA and SpaceX have a great partnership, and I look very forward to us reaching for the stars and reigniting our love and curiosity to try to take on big challenges. This is only going to the International Space Station. It's a mission we've done before. We've been partnering with Russia, which in a world where, which I love that. In a world where obviously we're not allied with Russia, we ally them. We can agree that we need to still send astronauts to the International Space Station, and they'll give us seats for $80 million a pop or something like that to get our noon Eastern. It's wherever podcasters are available. Just search No Gradient. And I love talking about these issues with you. This has been epic. Keep thinking through things. This is what we do on the show. We think through things. We talk about the hard issues. We talk about things that are going to matter in a decade. Thank you for listening. This was a lot of fun. I think we did a good job here today. And Chuck Finley will be posting on No Gradient Riff some of these clips, and we'll be releasing those for individual sharing. Thank you. Keep being truth seekers. Keep finding the truth. That's what it's all about. Let's do it. We're in this together, baby.